Okay. Yeah, I wasn't expecting it either. Okay, so the next story is the Red-Headed League. I had called upon my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes one day in the autumn of last year and found him in deep conversation with a very stout, florid-faced, elderly gentleman with a fiery red hair. With an apology for my intrusion, I was about to withdraw when Holmes pulled me abruptly into the room and closed the door behind me. "You could not possibly have come at a better time, my dear Watson," he said cordially. "I was afraid that you were engaged. So I am, very much so. Then I can't wait in the next room." "Not at all. This gentleman, Mr. Watson, has been my partner and helper in many of my most successful cases. I have no doubt that he will be of the utmost use to me in yours also." The stout gentleman half rose from his chair and gave a bob of greeting. With a quick little questioning glance from his small, flat, encircled eyes. "Try the settee," said Holmes, relapsing into his armchair and putting his fingertips together, as was his custom when in a judicial mood. "I know, my dear friend Watson, that you share my love of all that is bizarre and outside the conventions and humdrum routine of everyday life. You have shown your relish for it by the enthusiasm which have prompted you to Toronto, and if you will excuse me saying so, somewhat to embellish so many of my own little adventures. Your cases have indeed been of the greatest interest to me," I observed. "You will remember that I remarked the other day, just before we went into the very simple problem presented by Miss Mary Sutherland, that for strange effects and extraordinary combinations we must go to light itself, which is always far more daring than any effort of the imagination. A proposition which I took the liberty of doubting." "You did, Doctor, but nonetheless you must come round to my view, for otherwise I shall keep on piling facts upon facts on you until your reason breaks down under them and acknowledges me to be right. Now, Mr. Jabez Wilson here has been good enough to call upon me this morning and to begin a narrative which promises to be one of the most singular which I have listened to for some time. You have heard me remark that the strangest and most unique things are very often connected, not with the larger, but with the smaller crimes, and occasionally, indeed, where there is room for doubt, rather any positive crime has been committed. As far as I have heard, it is impossible for me to say whether the present case is an instance of crime or not, but the course of evidence is certainly among the most singular that I have ever listened to. Perhaps, Mr. Wilson, you would have the great kindness to recommend your narrative. I ask you not merely because my friend Dr. Watson has not heard the opening part, but also because the peculiar nature of the story makes me anxious to have every possible detail from your lips. As a rule, when I have heard some slight indication of the course of events, I am able to guide myself by the thousands of other similar cases which occurred to my memory. In the present instance, I am forced to admit that the facts are, to the best of my belief, unique." The portly client puffed out his chest with the appearance of some little pride and pulled a dirty and wrinkled newspaper from the inside pocket of his greatcoat. As he glanced down the advertisement column with his head thrust forward and the paper flying out upon his knee, I took a good look at the man and endeavored, after the fashion of my companion, to read the indication which might be presented by their dress or appearance. I did not gain very much, however, by my inspection. Our visitors bore every mark of being an average, commonplace British tradesman, obese, pompous, and slow. He wore rather baggy gray shepherd's check trousers, not a over clean black fur coat, unbuttoned in the front, and a drab waistcoat with a heavy brazy Albert chain and a square piece bit of metal dangling down as an ornament. A frayed top hat and a faded brown overcoat with a wrinkled velvet collar lay upon a chair beside him. Altogether, look as I would, there was nothing remarkable about the man, save his blazing red head, and the expression of extreme chagrin and the discontent upon his features. Sherlock Holmes' quick eye took in my occupation, and he shook his head with a smile as he noticed my questioning glances. Beyond the obvious facts that he has at some time done manual labor, that he takes snuff, and that he is a Freemason and has been in China, and he has done a considerable amount of writing lately, I can deduct nothing else. Mr. Jabs Wilson started up in his chair with his forefingers upon the paper, but his eyes upon my companion. "How in the name of good fortune did you know all of that, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "How did you know, for example, that I did manual labor? It's as true as gospel, for I begun as a ship's carpenter. Your hands, my dear sir. Your right hand is quite a large size than your left. You have worked with it, and the muscles are more developed." "Well, the snuff then, and the Freemasonry? I won't insult your intelligence by telling you how I read that, especially as rather against the strict rules of your order. You use an arch and compressed breastpin. Ah, of course, I forgot that. But the writing? What else can be indicated by the right cuff, so very shiny for 5 inches, and the left one with this smooth patch near the elbow where you rested upon the desk? Well, but China? The fish that you have tattooed immediately above your right wrist could only have been done in China. I have made a small study of tattoo marks, and have even contributed to literature of the subject. That trick of staining the fish's scales of a delicate pink is quite peculiar into China. When in addition I see a Chinese coin hanging from your watch chain, the matter became even more simple." Mr. Jabs Wilson laughed heavily. "Well, I never," he said. "I thought at first that you had done something clever, but I see there was nothing in it after all. I begin to think, Watson, that I make a mistake in explaining. Omen igatum pro magnificio. You know, and my poor little reputation, such as it is, will suffer shipwreck if I am so candid. Can you not find the advertisement, Mr. Wilson?" "Yes, I have got it now," he asked, with his thick red finger planted halfway down the column. "Here it is. This is what began it all. You just read it to yourself, sir." I took the paper from him and read as follows: "To the Red-Headed League, On the account of the bequest of the late Isaac Hopkins of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, USA, there is now another vacancy open which entitles a member of the League to a salary of, I'm assuming that's pounds? £4 a week for purely normal service. All red-headed men who are sound in body and mind and above the age of 21 years are eligible. Apply in person on a Monday at 11 o'clock to Duncan Rose at the League, 7 Pope's Court, Fleet Street. What on earth does this mean? I ejected? Ejaculated? After I had twice read over the extraordinary announcement, Holmes chuckled and wiggled in his chair, as was his habit when high in spirits. "It is a while off the beaten track, isn't it?" he said. "And now, Mr. Wilson, off you go. Scratch and tell us all about yourself, your household, and the effect with the advertisements had upon your fortunes. You will first make a note, Doctor, of the paper and the date. It is the Morning Chronicles of April 27, 1890. Just 2 months ago. Very good. Now, Mr. Wilson." "Well, it is just as I have been telling you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said James Wilson, mopping his forehead. "I have a small pawnbroker's business at Coburg Square near the city. It is not a very large affair, and of late years it has not done more than just give me a living. I used to be able to keep 2 assistants, but now I only keep 1, and I would have a job and I would to pay him, but that he is willing to come for half wages so as to learn the business." "What is the name of this obligating youth?" asked Sherlock Holmes. "His name is Vincent Spaulding, and he is not such a youth either. It's hard to say his age. I should not wish a smarter assistant, Mr. Holmes, and I know very well that he could better himself and earn twice what I am able to give him. But after all, if he is satisfied, why should I put ideas into his head?" "Why, indeed? You seem more fortunate in having an employee who comes under the full market price. It is not a common experience among employers in this age. I don't know what your assistant is not as remarkable as your advertisement." "Oh, he has his faults too," said Mr. Wilson. "Never was such a fellow for photography. Snapping away with a camera when he ought to be improving his mind, and now diving down into the cellar like a rabbit into his hole to develop his pictures. That is his main fault, but on the whole, he's a good worker. There's no vice in him." "He is still with you, I presume?" "Yes, sir. He and a girl of 14, who does a bit of simple cooking and keep the place clean. That's all I have in the house, for I am widower and never had any family. We live very quietly, sir, the 3 of us, and we keep a roof over our heads and pay our debts. If we do nothing more, the first thing that puts us out was that advertisement. Specially, he came down into the office just this day 8 weeks, with this very paper in his hand, and says, 'I wish to the Lord, Mr. Wilson, that I was a red-headed man.' Why that? I asked. Why, says he. Here is another vanity on the League of the Red-Headed Men. It's worth quite a little fortune to any man who gets it. And I understand that there are more vanities than there are men, so that the trustees are at their wits' end what to do with the money. If my hair would only change color, here's a nice little crib all ready for me to step into. Why, what is it then? I asked. You see, Mr. Holmes, I am a very stay-at-home man, and as my business comes to me instead of my having to go to it, I was often weeks on end without putting my foot over the doormat. In that way, I didn't know much of what was going on outside, and I was always glad of a bit of news. Have you ever heard of the League of Red-Headed Men? He asked with his eyes open. Never. Why? I wonder at that, for you are eligible yourself for one of these vanities. And what are they worth? I asked. Oh, merely a couple of $100 a year. But the work is slight and it needs not interfere very much with one's own occupations. Well, you can easily think that made me prick up my ears, for the business has not been over good for some years, and an extra couple of hundred would have been very handy. Tell me all about it, said I. Well, said he, showing me the advertisement, you can see for yourself that the League has a vacancy, and there is the address where you should apply for particulars. As far as I can make out, the League was founded by American millionaire Hezekiah Hopkins, who was very peculiar in his ways. Give me a sec. Thank you, Axe. He was himself red-headed, and he had a great sympathy for all red-headed men. So when he died, it was found that he had left his enormous fortune in the hands of trustees, with instructions to apply the interest to the providing of easy birth to men whose hair is of that color. From all I heard, it is splendid pay and very little to do. But, said I, there would be millions of red-headed men who would apply. Not so many as you may think, he answered. You see, it is really confined to Londoners and to grown men. This American had started from London when he was young, and he wanted to do the old town a good turn. Then again, I have heard it is no use you're applying if your hair is light red or dark red, or anything but real bright, blazing, fiery red. Now, if you care to apply, Mr. Wilson, you would just walk in, but perhaps it would hardly be worth your while to put yourself out of the way for the sake of a few £100. Now, it is a fact, gentlemen, as you may see for yourself, that my hair is of a very full and rich tint, so that it seems to me that if there was to be any competition in the matter, I stood as good a chance as any man I had ever met. Vincent Spedling seemed to know so much about it that I thought he might prove useful, so I just ordered him to put out the shutters for the day and to come right away with me. He was very willing to have a holiday, so we shut the business up and started off for the address that was given us in the advertisement. I never hope to see such a sight as that again, Mr. Holmes. From north, south, east, and west, every man who had a shade of red in his hair had trampled into the city to answer the advertisement. Fleet Street was choked with red-headed folks, and Pope's Count looked like a coaster orange barrow. I should not have thought there were so many in the whole country as were brought together by that single advertisement. Every shade of color that were straw, lemon, orange, brick, Irish settler, liver, clay, but as Spellington said, there were not many who had the real vivid flame-colored tint. When I saw how many were waiting, I would have given it up in despair, but Burnley would not hear of it. How he did it, I could not imagine, but he pushed and pulled and butted until he got me through the crowd and right up to the steps which led to the office. There was a double stream upon the stair, some going up in hopes and some coming back dejected, but we wedged in as well, and we could and soon found ourselves in the office. Your experience has been a most entertaining one, remarked Holmes as his client paused and refreshed his memory with a huge pinch of snuff. Pray continue your very interesting statement. There was none in the office but a couple of wooden chairs and a deal table behind which sat a small man with a head that was even redder than mine. He said a few words to each candidate as he came up, and then he always managed to find some fault in them which would disqualify them. Getting a vacancy did not seem to be such a very easy matter after all. However, when our turns came, the little man was much more favorable to me than to any of the others, and he closed the door as we entered, so that he might have a private word with us. This is Mr. Giles Wilson, said my assistant, and he is willing to fill a vanity in the league. And he is admirably suited for it, the other answered. He has every requirement. I cannot recall when I have seen anything so fine. He took a step backward, cocked his head on one side, and gazed in my hair until I felt quite bashful. Then suddenly he plunged forward, wrung my hand, and congratulated me warmly on my success. It would be injustice to hesitate, said he. You will, however, I am sure, excuse me for taking an obvious precaution. With that, he seized my hair in both of his hands and tugged until I yelled with pain. There is water in your eyes, said he as he released me. I perceive that all is as it should be, but we have to be careful, for we have twice been deceived by wigs and once by paint. I could tell your tale of a cobbler's wax, which would disgust you with human nature. He stepped over to the window and shouted through it at the top of his voice that the vanity was filled, and a groan of disappointment came upon from below, and the folk all toppled away in different directions until there was not a red head to be seen except my own and that of the manager. My name, said he, is Mr. Duncan Rose. I am myself one of the pioneers upon the funds left by our noble benefactor. Are you a married man, Mr. Wilson? Have you a family? I answered that I had not. His face fell immediately. Dear me, he said gravely, that is very serious indeed. I am sorry to hear you say that. The funds was, of course, for the propagation and spread of the redheads as well as for their maintenance. It is extremely unfortunate that you should be a bachelor. My face lengthened at that Mr. Holmes, for I thought that I was not to have a vanity after all. But after thinking it over for a few minutes, he said that it would be all right. In the case of another, said he, the objection might be fatal, but we must stretch a point in favor of a man with such a head of hairs as yours. When shall you be able to enter upon your new duties? Well, it is a little awkward, for I have a business already, said I. Oh, never mind about that, Mr. Wilson, said Vincent blandly. I should be able to look after that for you. What would be the hours, I asked. 10 to 2. Now a pawnbroker's business is mostly done of an evening, Mr. Holmes, especially Thursdays and Fridays evenings, which is just before payday. So it would suit me very well to earn a little in the morning. Besides, I knew that my assistant was a good man and that he would see anything that turned up. That would suit me very well, said I. In the pay? Is £4 a week. And the work is purely nominal. What do you call purely nominal? Nominal? Whatever. Well, you have to be in the office, or at least in the building the whole time. If you leave, you forfeit your whole position forever. The will is very clear upon that point. You don't comply with the conditions if you budge from the office during that time. I guess. That or I should probably be drinking water instead of tea. And on that note, I should probably grab another bottle. Give me one sec.
I got water this time.
Okay. And the work? It's purely nominal. What do you call purely nominal? Well, you have to be in the office, or at least in the building, the whole time. If you leave, you forfeit your whole position forever. The will is very clear upon that point. You don't comply with the conditions if you budget from the office during that time. It's only 4 hours a day, and I should not think of leaving, said I. No excuses will avail, said Mr. Duncan Rose. Neither sickness nor business nor anything else. There you must stay, or you lose your billet. And the work is to copy out the Encyclopedia Britannica. There is the first volume of it in that press. You must find your own ink, pens, and blotted paper, but we provide this table and chair. Will you be ready tomorrow? Certainly, I answered. Then goodbye, Mr. Giles Wilson, and let me congratulate you once more on the important position which you have been fortunate enough to gain. He bowed me out of the room, and I went home with my assistant, hardly knowing what to say or do. I was so pleased at my own good fortune. Well, I thought over the matter all day, and by evening I was in low spirits again, for I had quite persuaded myself that the whole affair must be some great hoax or fraud, though what its object might be, I could not imagine. It seemed altogether past belief that anyone would make such a will, or that they would pay such a sum for doing anything so simple as copying out the Encyclopedia Britannica. Vincent Spiley did what he could to cheer me up, but by bedtime I had reasoned myself out of the whole thing. However, in the morning I determined to have a look at it anyhow, so I brought a penny bottle of ink, and with a quill pen and 7 sheets of foolscap paper, I started off the Pope Court. Well, to my surprise and delight, everything was as right as possible. The table was set out ready for me, and Mr. Duncan Rose was there to see that I got fairly to work. He started me off upon the letter A, and then he left me, but he would drop in from time to time to see that all was all right with me. At 2 o'clock, he bade me good night, complimented me upon the amount that I had written, and locked the door of the office after me. This went on day after day, Mr. Holmes, and on Saturday, the manager came in and lanked down 4 golden souvenirs. This has to be like some kind of coin or something. Sovereigns? For my week's work. It was the same next week, and the same that week after that. Every morning I was there at 10, and every afternoon I left at 2. By degrees, Mr. Duncan Rose took to coming in only once of a morning, and then, after a time, he did not come in at all. Still, of course, I never dared to leave the room for an instant, for I was not sure when he might come, and the billet was such a good one, and suited me so well, that I would not risk the loss of it. 8 weeks passed away like this, and I had written about Ovid and the archery, and a almoner, and the architect, and Aticia. It holds with diligence that I may get on to the bees before very long. It cost me something in full scope, and I pretty nearly filled a shelf with my writing, and then suddenly the whole business came to an end. To an end? Yes, sir. And no later than that morning, I went to my work as usual at 10, but the door was shut and locked, with a little square of cardboard hammered on to the middle of the panel with a tack. Here it is, and you can read it for yourself. He held up a piece of white cardboard, about the size of a sheet of notepaper. it read in this fashion: "The Red-Headed League is dissolved, October 9th, 1890. Sherlock Holmes and I surveyed this curt announcement and the rueful face behind it until the comical side of the affair so completely overtopped every other consideration that we both burst into a roar of laughter. "I cannot see that there is anything very funny," cried our client, flashing up to the roots of his flaming head. "If you can do nothing better than to laugh at me, I could go elsewhere." "No, no," cried Holmes, shoving him back into the chair from which he had half risen. "I really wouldn't miss your case for the world. It is most refreshingly unusual, but there it is, if you will excuse me my saying so. Something's just a little funny about it. Pray, what steps did you take when you found the card upon the door?" "I was staggered, sir. I did not know what to do. Then I called at the office round, but none of them seemed to know anything about it. Finally, I went to the landlord, who is an accountant living at the ground floor. I asked him if he could tell me what had become of the Red-Headed League. He said that he had never heard of any such body. Then I asked him who Mr. Gucken Rose was. He answered that the name was new to him. 'Well,' I said, 'the gentleman at number 4. "'What, the red-headed man?' "'Yes.' "'Oh,' said he, 'his name is William Morris. He was a celator and was using my room as a temporary convenience until his new premises were ready. He moved out yesterday.' "'Where could I find him?' "'Oh, at his new offices. He did tell me the address. Yes, 17 King Edward Street, near St. Paul's. I started off, Mr. Holmes, but when I got to that address, it was a manufactory of artificial kneecaps, and no one in it had ever heard of either Mr. William Morris or Mr. Gucken Rose.' "'And what did you do then?' asked Mr. Holmes. "'I went home to Savcoburg Square, and I took the advice of my assistant, but he could not help me in any way. He could only say that if I waited I could hear by post. But that was not quite good enough, Mr. Holmes. I did not wish to lose such a place without a struggle. So, as I had heard that you were good enough to give advice to poor folk who are in need of it, I came right away to you.' "'And you did very wisely,' said Mr. Holmes. 'Your case is an extraordinarily remarkable one, and I shall be happy to look into it. From what you have told me, I think that it is possible that the graver issues hang from it than might at first sight appear.' "'Grave enough?' said Mr. Jab Wilson. 'Why, I have lost 4 pounds a week.' "'As far as you are personally concerned,' remarked Holmes, 'I do not see that you have any grievance against the Extraordinary League. On the contrary, you are, as I understand, richer by some 30 pounds, to say nothing of the minute knowledge which you have gained on every subject which came under the letter A. You have lost nothing by them.' "'No, sir, but I want to find out about them, and who they are, and what their object was in playing this prank. If it was a prank upon me, it was a pretty expensive joke for them, for it cost them 32 pounds. We shall endeavor to clear up these points for you, and first, 1 or 2 questions. Mr. Wilson, this assistant of yours who first called your attention to the advertisement, how long had he been with you?' "'About a month then.' "'And how did he come?' "'In answer to an advertisement.' "'Was he the only applicant?' "'No, I had dozens.' "'Why did you pick him?' "'Because he was handy. It would come cheap.' "'At half wages, in fact?' "'Yes.' "'What is he like, this Vincent Sprengeling?' "'Small, Spout build, very quick in his ways, no hair on his face. Thought, though he's not short of 30. Has a wide splash of acid upon his forehead. Holmes sat up in his chair in considerable excitement. I thought as much. Have you ever observed that his ears are pierced for earrings? Yes, sir. He told me that a gypsy had done it for him when he was a lad. Said Holmes, sinking back in deep thought. He is still with you? Oh, yes, sir. I have only just left him. And has your business been attended to in your absence? Nothing to complain of, sir. There is never very much to do of a morning. That will do, Mr. Wilson. I shall be happy to give you an opinion upon the subject in the course of a day or two. Today is Saturday, and I hope that by Monday we may come to a conclusion. Well, Watson, said Holmes, when our visitor had left us, what do you make of it all? I make nothing of it, I answered frankly. It is a most mysterious business. As a rule, said Holmes, the more bizarre a thing is, the less mysterious it proves to be. It is your commonplace, featureless crimes which are... yeah. It is your commonplace, featureless crimes which are really puzzling, just as a commonplace face is the most difficult to identify. But I must be prompt over this matter. What are you going to do then? I asked. To smoke, he answered. It is quite a 3-pipe problem, and I beg that you won't speak to me for 50 minutes. He curled himself up in his chair with his thin knees drawn up to his hawk-like nose, and there he sat with his eyes closed and his black clay pipe thrusted out like the bill of some strange bird. I had come to the conclusion that he had dropped asleep, and decided, and indeed was nodding himself, when he suddenly sprung out of his chair with the gesture of a man who has made up his mind and put his pipe down upon the mantelpiece. Sarah State plays at the St. James Hall this afternoon, he remarked. What do you think, Watson? Could your parents spare you for a few hours? Patience. Well, could your patients spare you for a few hours? I have nothing to do today. My practice is never very absorbing. Then put on your hat and come. I am going through the city first, and we can have some lunch on the way. I observe that there is a good deal of German music on the program, which is rather more to my taste than Italian or French. It is introspective, and I want to introspect. Come along. We traveled by the underground as far as Elder's Gate, and a short walk took us to Saki Coburg Square, the seat of the singular story which we had listened to in the morning. It was a hokey little, shabby, genteel place where 4 lines of dingy 2-story brick houses looked out into a small railed-in enclosure, where a lawn of weedy grass and a few clams and flatted laurel bushes made a hard fight against a smoke-laden and uncongenial atmosphere. 3 gilt bells and a brown rod with Jabs Wilson in white letter upon a corner house announced the place where our red-headed client carried on his business. Sherlock Holmes stopped in front of it with his head on one side and looked it all over, with his eyes shining brightly between perked lids. Then he walked slowly up the street and then down against to the corner, still looking keenly at the houses. Finally, he returned to the pawnbroker's and having thumped vigorously upon the pavement with his stick 2 or 3 times, he went up to the door and knocked. It was instantly opened by a bright-looking, clean-shaven young fellow who asked him to step in. "Thank you," said Holmes. "I only wish to ask you how would you go from here to the Strand?" "Third right, fourth left," answered the assistant promptly, closing the door. "Smart fellow that," observed Holmes as he walked away. "He is, in my judgment, the 4th smartest man in London. And for Derrick, I am not sure that he has not claimed to be 3rd. I have known something of him before. Evidently," said I, "Mr. Wilson's assistant counts for a good deal in this mystery of the Red-Headed League. I am sure that you inquired your way merely in order that you might see him." "Not him. What then?" "The knees of his trousers." "And what did you see?" "What I expected to see." "Why did you beat the pavement?" "My dear doctor, this is a time for observation, not for talk. We are spies in an enemy's country. We know something of Saxe-Coburg Square. Let us now explore the parts, what lies behind it." The road in which we found ourselves as we turned around the corner from the retired Saxe-Coburg Square presented us great a contrast to it as the front of a picture does to the back. It was one of the main arteries which conveyed the traffic of the city to the north and west. The roadway was blocked with the immune stream of currents flowing in a terrible tide inward and outward, while the footpaths were back with a hurrying swarm of pedestrians. It was difficult to realize, as we looked at the line of fine shops and stately business premises, that they really abutted on the other side upon the faded and stagnant square which he had just quitted. "Let me see," said Holmes, standing at the corner and glancing along the line. "I should like just to remember the order of the houses here. It is a hobby of mine to have an exact knowledge of London. There is Mortimer's, the tobacconist, the little newspaper shop, the Coburg branch of the city, and the Suburban Bank, the Vegetation Restaurant, and Mr. Verlaine's carriage building depot. That carries us right on the other block. And now, Doctor, we've done our work, and so it's time we had some play. A sandwich and a cup of coffee, and then off to Violin Land, where all is sweetness and delicacy and harmony, and there are no red-headed clients to vex us with their conundrums." My friend was an enthusiastic musician, being himself not only a very capable performer, but a composer of no honorary merit. All the afternoon he sat in the stall, wrapped in the most perfect happiness, gently waving his long, thin fingers in time to the music, while his gently smiling face and his languid, dreamy eyes were as unlikely those of Holmes, the sleuth hound. Holmes, the relentless, keen-witted, ready-handed criminal agent as it was possible to conceive. In his singular character, the dual nature ultimately asserted itself in its extreme exactness and as sweetness represented. As I have often thought, the reaction against the poetic and contemplative mood was occasionally predominant in him. The swing of his nature took him from extreme languor to devouring energy, and as I know well, he was never so truly formidable as when, for days on end, he had been lounging in his armchair amid his improvisations and his black leather editions. Then it was that the lust of the case would suddenly come upon him, and that his brilliant reasoning power would rise to the level of intuition until those who were unacquainted with his methods will look askance at him as a man whose knowledge was not that of other mortals. Yeah. When I saw him that afternoon, so enwrapped in the music at St. James Hall's, I felt that an evil time might be coming upon those whom he had set himself to hunt down. You want to go home, no doubt, Doctor. Thank you, accent. You want to go home, no doubt, Doctor, he remarked as we emerged. Yes, it would be as well. And I have some businesses to do, which will take some hours. This business at Coburg Square is serious. Why serious? A considerable crime is a contemplation. I have every reason to believe that we shall be in time to stop it. But today, being Saturday, rather complicates matters. I shall want your help tonight. At what time? 10 will be early enough. I shall be at Baker Street at 10. Very well. Very well. And I say, Doctor, there may be some little danger, so kindly put your army revolver in your pocket. He waved his hand, turned on his heel, and disappeared in an instant among the crowd. I trust that I am not more dense than my neighbors, but I was always oppressed with the sense of my own stupidity in my dealings with Sherlock Holmes. Here I had heard what he had heard. I had seen what he had seen, and yet from his words it was evident he saw clearly not only what had happened, but what was about to happen. While to me the whole business was still confused and grotesque. Confusing grotesque. As I drove home to my house in Kensington, I thought over it all, from the extraordinary story of the red-headed copier of the encyclopedia down to the visit to Coburg Square in the ominous words with which he had parted from me. What was this nocturnal expedition, and why should I go armed? Where were we going, and what were we to do? I had the hint from Holmes that his smooth-faced pawnbroker assistant was a formidable man, a man who might play a deep game. I tried to puzzle it out, but gave it up in despair, and set the matter aside until night should bring an explanation. Yeah, Juju. It was 9:15 when I started from home and made my way across the park. And so, through Oxford Street to Baker Street, 2 hansoms were standing at the door, and as I entered the passage, I heard the sound of voices from above. On entering his room, I found Holmes in an animated conversation with 2 men, one of whom I recognized as Peter Jones, the official police agent, while the other was a long, thin, sad-faced man with a very shiny hat and oppressive, respectable frock coat. "Ha, a party is complete," said Holmes, buttoning up his pea jacket and taking his heavy hunting crop from the rack. "Watson, I think you know Mr. Jones of Scotland Yard. Let me introduce you to Mr. Merryweather, who is to be our companion in tonight's adventure." "We're hunting in a couple again, Doctor, you see," said Jones in this consequential way. "Our friend here is a wonderful man for starting a chase. All he wants is an old dog to help him to do the running down. I hope a wild goose may not prove to be the end of our case," observed Mr. Merryweather gloomily. "You may place considerable confidence in Mr. Holmes, sir," said the police agent loftily. "He has his own little methods, which are, if he won't mind my saying so, just a little too theatrical and fantastic. But he has the markings of a detective in him. It is not too much to say that once or twice, as in that business of the Sherlock murder and the Agra treasure, he has been more nearly correct than the official force." "Oh, if you say so, Mr. Jones, it is all right," said the stranger with deference. "Still, I confess that I miss my rubber. It is the first Saturday night for the 7 and 20 years that I have not had my rubber." "I think you will find," said Sherlock Holmes, "that you will play by higher stake tonight than you have ever done yet, and that play will be more exciting. For you, Mr. Merryweathers, the stake will be some £30,000, and for you, Jones—" I guess. "And for you, Jones, it will be the man upon whom you wish to lay your hands." Sorry. My, yeah, my, was it? My browser, like, froze for a moment. Yeah. It wouldn't let me scroll down or anything, and then, like, it completely froze, Twitch, on my side anyway. Okay. John Clay, the murderer, thief, smasher, and forger. He's a young man, Mr. Merriweather, but he is at the head of his profession. And I would rather have my bracelets on him than on any criminal in London. He is a remarkable man, is young John Clay. His grandfather was a royal duke, and he himself has been to Eton at Oxford. His brain is as cunning as his fingers. And though we meet signs of him at every turn, we never know where to find the man himself. He'll crack a cab in Scotland one week and be raising money to build an orphanage in Cornwall the next. I've been on his track for years and have never set eyes on him yet. I hope that I may have the pleasure of introducing you tonight. I've had one or two little turns also with Mr. John Clay, and I agree with you that he is at the head of his profession. It is past 10, however, and quite the time that we started. If you two will take the first hansom, Watson and I will follow in the second. Sherlock Holmes was not very communicative during the long drive and lay back in the cab, humming the tunes which he had heard in the afternoon. We rattled through an endless labyrinth of gas-lit streets until we emerged into Farrington Street. We are close there now, my friend remarked. This fellow, Merriweather, is a bank director and personally interested in the matter. I thought it as well to have Jones with us also. He is not a bad fellow, though an absolute imbecile in his profession. Am I saying that right? Imbecile? He is calling him stupid. Oh my god, that's so mean. Though an absolute imbecile in his profession, he has a positive virtue. He is as brave as a bulldog and as tempestuous as a lobster if he gets his claws upon anyone. Here we are, and they are waiting for us. We had reached the same crowded thoroughfare in which we had found ourselves in the morning. Our cabs were dismissed, and following the guidance of Mr. Merriweather, we passed down a narrow passage and through a side door, which he opened for us. Within there was a small corridor, which ended in a very massive iron gate. This also was open and led down a flight of winding stone steps, which terminated at another formidable gate. Mr. Merriweather stopped to light a lantern, and then conducted us down a dark, earth-smelling passage, and so, after opening a third door, into a huge vault, or cellar, which was piled all around with crates and massive boxes. You are not very vulnerable from above, Holmes remarked, as he held up the lantern and gazed upon him. Nor from below, said Mr. Merriweather, striking his stick upon the flag which lined the floor. Why, dear me, it's quite hollow, he remarked, looking up in surprise. I must really ask you to be a little more quiet, said Holmes sternly. You have already imperiled the whole success of our expedition. Might I beg you that you would have the goodness to sit down upon one of those boxes and not to interfere. The solemn Mr. Merriweather perched himself upon a crate with a very injured expression upon his face, while Holmes fell upon his knees upon the floor, and with the lantern and a magnifying lens began to examine minutely the cracks between the stone. A few seconds sufficed to satisfy him, for he sprung to his feet and put his glass in his pocket. We have at least an hour before us, he remarked, for they can hardly take any steps until the good pawnbreaker is safely in bed. Then they will not lose a minute, for the sooner they do their work, the longer time they will have for their escape. We are at present, Doctor, as no doubt you have divined, in the cellar of the city branch of one of the principal London banks. Mr. Merriweather is the chairman of directors, and he will explain to you that there are reasons why the more daring criminals of London should take a considerable interest in this cellar at present. It is our French gold, whispered the director. We had several warnings that an attempt might be made upon it. Your French gold? Yes, we had occasion some months ago to straighten our resource and borrowed for that purpose 30,000 Napoleons from the Bank of French. It has become known that we have never had occasion to unpack the money, and that it is still lying in our cellar. The crates upon which I sit contains 2,000 Napoleons, packed between layers of lead foil. Our reserve of bullion is much larger at present than it usually kept in a single branch office, and the directors have had misgivings upon the subject, which were very well justified, observed Holmes. And now it is time that we arrange our little plan. I expect that within an hour matters will come to a head. In the meantime, Mr. Merriweather, we must put the screen over the dark lantern. And sit in the dark? I am afraid so. I had brought a pack of cards in my pocket, and I thought that we were a partie carrée. You might have your rubber after all, but I see that the enemy preparations have gone so far that we cannot risk the presence of light. And first of all, we must choose our positions. These are daring men, and though we shall take them at a disadvantage, they may do us some harm unless we are careful. I shall stand behind this crate, and do you conceal yourselves behind those. Then, when I flash a light upon them, close in swiftly. If they fire, Watson, have no compulsion about shooting them down. Hold on. Doesn't sound right. Compensation about shooting them down. I placed my revolver cocked upon the top of the wooden case behind which I crouched. Holmes shot the side across the front of his lantern and left us in pitch darkness. Such an absolute darkness as I have never before experienced. The smell of hot metal remained to assure us that the light was still there, ready to flash out at a moment's notice. To me, with my nerves worked up to a pitch of expectancy, there was something depressing, subduing in the sudden gloom and in the dark, dank air of the vault. "They have but one retreat," whispered Holmes. "This is back through the house into Sescoburg Square. I hope that you have done what I asked you, Jones. I have an inspector and 2 officers waiting at the front door. When we have stopped all the holes, and now we must be silent and wait." What a time it seems! From comparing notes afterwards, it was but an hour and a quarter, yet it appeared to me that the night must have almost gone, and the dawn be breaking above us. My limbs were weary and stiff, for I feared to change my position, yet my nerves were worked up to the highest pitch of tension, and my hearing was so acute that I could not only hear the gentle breathing of my companions, but I could distinguish the deep, heavier in-breath of the bulky Jones from the thin, sighing note of the bank director. From my position, I looked over the case in the direction of the floor. Suddenly, my eyes caught the glint of a light. At first, it was but a lurid spark upon the stone pavement. Then it lengthened out until it became a yellow line, and then without any warning or sound, a gash seemed to open and a hand appeared, a white, almost womanly hand with felt about in the center of the little area of light. For a moment or more the hand, with its withering fingers, protruded out of the floor. Then it was withdrawn as suddenly as it appeared, and all was dark again, save the single lurid spark which marked a chink between the stone. Its disappearance, however, was but momentarily. With a rending, tearing sound, one of the broad white stones turned over upon its side and left a square gaping hole through which streamed the light of a lantern. Over the edge there peeped a clean-cut boyish face, which looked keenly about it, and then with a hand on either side of the departure, drew itself shoulder high and waist high, until one knee rested upon the edge. In another instant he stood at the side of the hole and was hurling after him a companion, little and small like him, with a pale face and a shock of very red hair. "It's all clear," he whispered. "Have you the chisel and bags? Great Scott! Jump, Archie, jump, and I'll swing for it." Sherlock Holmes had sprung out and seized the intruder by the collar. The other dived down the hole, and I heard the sound of rending cloth as Jones clenched at his skirts. The light flashed upon the barrel of a revolver, but Holmes' hunting crop came down on the man's wrist, and the pistol clanked upon the stone floor. "It's no use, John Clay," said Holmes blandly. "You have no chance at all." "So I see," the other answered with the utmost coolness. "I fancy that my pal is all right, though I see you have got his coat-tails." "There are 3 men waiting for him at the door," said Holmes. "Oh, indeed, you seem to have done the thing very completely. I must compliment you." "And I you," Holmes answered. "Your red-headed idea was very new and effective." "You'll see your pal again presently, said Jones. "He's quicker at climbing down holes than I am." Just hold out while I fix the debris. Debris? I beg that you will not touch me with your filthy hands, remarked our prisoner as a handcuff clattered upon his wrist. You may not be aware that I have royal blood in my veins. Have the goodness also, when you address me, always to say sir and please. All right, said Jones with a stare and a snicker. Well, would you please, sir, march upstairs where we can get a cab to carry your highness to the police station? That is better, said John Clay sneeringly. He made a sweeping bow to the three of us and walked quietly off in the custody of detectives. Really, Mr. Holmes, said Mr. Merriweather, as we followed them from the cellar, I do not know how the bank can thank you or repay you. There is no doubt that you have detected and defeated in the most complete manner one of the most determined attempts at bank robbery that ever came within my experience. I have had one or two little scores of my own to settle with Mr. John Clay, said Holmes. I have been at some small expense over this matter, which I shall expect the bank to refund, but beyond that I am amply repaid by having had experience which is in many ways unique, and by hearing the very remarkable narrative of the red-headed leak. You see, Watson, he explained in the early mornings of the morning, as we sat over a glass of whiskey and a soda in Baker Street, it is perfectly obvious from the first that the only possible object of this rather fantastic business of the advertisement of the League and the copying of the encyclopedia must be to get this not over bright pawnbroker out of the way for a number of hours every day. It was a curious way of managing it, but really it would be difficult to suggest a better. The method was no doubt suggested to Clay's ingenious mind by the color of his accomplice's hair. The £4 a week was a lure which must draw him, and what was it to them, who were paying for thousands? They put in the advertisement, one rogue has the temporary office, the other rogue incites the man to apply for it, and together they managed to secure his absence every morning in the week. From the time that I heard of the assistant having come for half wage, it was obvious to me that he had some strong motive for securing the situation. But how could you guess what the motive was? Had there been a woman in the house, I should have suspected a mere vulgar intrigue. That, however, was out of the question. The man's business was a small one, and there was nothing in his house which could account for such elaborate preparations and such an expenditure as they were at. It was then by something out of the house. What could it be? I thought of the assistant's fondness for photography and his trick of vanishing into the cellar. The cellar. There was the end of this tangled clue that I made inquiries as to this mysterious assistant and found that I had to do with one of the coolest and most daring criminals in London. He was doing something in the cellar, something which took many hours a day for months on end. What could it be? Once more, I could think of nothing save that he was running a tunnel to some other building. So far I had got when we went to visit the scene of action. I surprised you by beating upon the pavement with my stick. I was ascertaining whether the cellar stretched out in front or behind. It was not in front. Then I rang the bell, and as I hoped, the assistant answered it. We have had some skirmishes, but we had never set eyes upon each other before. I hardly looked at his face. His knees were what I wished to see. You must yourself have remarked how worn, wrinkled, and stained they were. They spoke of those hours of burrowing. The only reasoning point was that they were burrowing for. I walked around the corner, saw the city and suburban bank abutted on our friend's premises, and felt that I had solved my problem. When you drove home after the concert, I called upon Scotland Yard and upon the chairman of the bank directors, with the result that you have seen. And how could you tell they would make their attempts tonight? I asked. Well, when they closed their league office, that was a sign that they cared no longer about Mr. Jobs Wilson's presence. In other words, that they had completed their tunnel. But it was essential that they should use it soon, as it might be discovered, or the bulletin might be removed. Saturday would suit them better than any other day, as it would give them 2 days for their escape. For all these reasons, I expected them to come tonight. You reasoned it out beautifully, I exclaimed, in unfeigned admiration. It is so long a chain, and yet every link rings true. It saved me from ennui, he answered, yawning. Alas, I already feel it's closing in upon me. My life is spent in one long effort to escape from the commonplaces of existence. These little problems help me to do so, and you are a benefactor of the race, said I. He shrugged his shoulders. Well, perhaps, after all, it is of some little use, he remarked. Le homme est terrain, l'avenir est tau, as Gracie Bluebird wrote to George Sand. And that's it. Yep. Oh yeah. How he went from we were talking to the he was talking to that one guy, is like talking about the assistant, and then it switched over to his plan. Yeah, I didn't realize until the end that like the guy was the assistant.